This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
Don't knew the answer.
Well, I don't know the answer. I'm guessing.
No, that's the truth.
And that's why we're the #1 podcast in all the realms, folks.
Because necromancy is for good guys.
You're gonna dig that one up.
Bring me all your gold pieces.
Now I'm just imagining a Xanathar that sounds like Christopher Walken.
Hey, where's my goldfish?
What can you tell us about the Lords of Waterdeep?
Not even the lords. Not the lords, Ben. That would be more exciting.
This week on D&D Shopping.
We've done it, everyone. We've finally broken mainstream. The Guardian, I believe, got involved. Fox News got involved.
All that and more right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms. That's right, we're back. 2025 is here, baby. And we are going to bring you the most accurate, the most nuanced, the most thought out commentary and news on the tabletop RPG industry of anywhere else, I dare say, in my opinion. And if you don't get that joke, you're already 5 steps behind the rest of us. I am joined, as always, by Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake. And James, I'm going to ask you, over the break period, did you watch Secret Level?
I watched one part of it. I watched the Warhammer 40K one with my family that is obsessed with Warhammer 40K decided to show it to me.
Okay, how did you find that episode of Secret Level?
It reminded me of the cinematics that Blizzard used to make in their heyday for like World of Warcraft, where they were unbelievably well produced, really action heavy. It had some character moments, and it was basically an ad for the video game. And when I loved those shorts, I was like, Blizzard should just make a movie at this point. That's not an uncommon sentiment either. Like, you look at the animations for like Warlords of Draenor or Legion or any of those sort of more modern. They're not very modern anymore, but the more modern WoW expansions. People were like, yeah, you should make a movie out of this. And it feels like someone heard that. And it's really funny that it's not Blizzard, right? Blizzard has collapsed so much in the past 10 years that this thing that was their specialty has sort of been scooped out from under them to make this Secret Level thing. I really should watch the D&D one, but I mean, the 40K one. It was pretty cool. As someone who kind of has a 30,000 foot understanding of who Space Marines and Chaos Gods and Tyranids are, it was like, that was really neat.
Well, you need to work on that because you really need a 40-foot understanding to be able to understand the 40K universe. It's interesting to me, though, that you said it's like a cinematic for like for a video game, like a cinematic advertisement, because not to bury the lead, but that's all they all really were. I was a little bit kind of underwhelmed by the whole thing. I was like, yeah, Titus is a cool gruff dude, I guess. Cool. But then again, I'm not a Space Marine specifically guy. I think Space Marines are probably the least interesting part of the 40K universe. So
I watched the D&D episode and I turned off Critical Brain and just said, let's watch this and have fun. And I watched it and I had fun. If I didn't know what D&D was, I would watch that and say, hey, it might be fun to try that. There were the little Easter eggs where I'm like, oh, that's the dwarf monk and this and that. Are we spoiling it?
Yeah, spoil it.
Spoilers for Secret Level, engage.
It was sort of telegraphed, but it was telegraphed in a clever way that what they thought they were doing was saving this little orphan almost, and what they were doing was unleashing Tiamat on the world. But, who hasn't unleashed Tiamat on the world without knowing it?
Who hasn't mistaken a giant 5-headed dragon for an orphan? What?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. It's a 5-headed dragon orphan that they're trying to say.
Yeah. I don't think so. I think they're
dragon.
having us. I think they're having to go.
They might be.
No, I am literally not. That was exactly what happened. It wasn't.
Okay, now I need to watch it. What?
You should watch it.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I forgot James hadn't watched it either. Okay. I mean, I haven't watched all of Secret Level. I've watched a handful of them. I did watch the Exodus one as well, and it was... I don't know, if you don't have context for Exodus, which is the sci-fi video game that a subsidiary of Wizards of the Coast is working on, and visually it looks very cool, but like, I thought the D&D one did a good job of telling a story about how D&D should make you feel as heroes in this realm, where bad things happen, but you never give up hope.
Mm.
You know, is kind of like an objectively terrible thing happens as a result of the hero's actions, and yet they are not dissuaded and continue to team up and fight together anyway. So I thought that kind of captured a vibe.
I dig that.
Yeah. I think this is what's interesting to me is that it was my mother who knew about Secret Level and was like, it's got Warhammer and D&D. And my brother and I were there at my parents' place. And she was like, this is a thing we can put on that you will both watch and enjoy. And my brother and I were the ones dragging our heels about it.
Over it.
And then we put on Christopher Nolan Batman movies instead.
Okay, fair enough. What did you think of those? Were those good, Dael?
Batman Begins is better in my memory than it is in real life. And The Dark Knight is like exactly 30 minutes too long.
It's too cynical for the new year. What are we doing here?
No, I'm the one that's like,
hey, this is great. And
The Dark Knight Rises was bad.
Role reversals. Yeah. I love it. Is that what we're doing this year? Okay, cool.
Apologies to my mother.
It's a freaky Friday. It's a freaky new year.
Well, speaking of things that we can all be positive on, I'm sure. Wizards of the Coast, I believe at the end of last year, this is there's a lot of bits of news that came out during the break that we're going to catch up on. Starting with the release of the Artificer as an Unearthed Arcana article, I guess, or document that you can now download. Wizards of the Coast have put out a version of the Artificer as an Unearthed Arcana that has been updated to the 2024 D&D rules, updating all the subclasses that the Artificer previously had as well. What did we think? Did anybody take a particular look at that?
Updating them all, but with a new one as well. I believe it's called the Dreadnought. Particularly a mech suit wearing Artificer that can reach large size within its personal machine.
Wasn't there an armorer one previously? Was it called something different?
Oh, no, yeah, sorry. It's not a new subclass. It's a third option in the armorer. There's the heavy armor, there's the stealth armor, and there's the Dreadnought armorer. That's what it was.
One of those has a way better name than the other two. Does it not?
Yeah, I don't remember what the original two are called. I've got an armor artificer in my home game, and they never call it by the real name, so I've forgotten entirely.
Well, what did you think, James? Did you have a look at much of the rest of it? Do you think it's an improvement?
You know, I like the concept a lot. I think it's a little odd, the Dreadnought in particular, because 5e, and especially 2024 5e, is so averse to non-medium-sized player characters that a subclass making you large, it's a bit of a short circuit for me. I think large player characters are great. I think we should do that. But I'm like, from a game unity perspective, should they be doing that here now? After all the species get powerful build that we've done so far, Goliaths, and we're like, are we doing this here now? I'm in a weird place because I love it in a vacuum, but in context, it feels odd to me. I've got some minor gripes with some of the changes they've made. I forget which one it was. Can you tell I looked at this like 2 weeks ago? One of the Artificer infusions, it's like Radiant Weapon or something, has been made into its own category rather than just an infusion, its own type of magic item. And it feels weak for a rare magic item. It feels like some of the just like nitty gritty balance is off in some of these ideas, but I think the ideas themselves are really compelling, which I think is the ideal place for an Unearthed Arcana to be, assuming the balance gets straightened out by the end of the day.
We'll just I'll quickly run through what I think are kind of the main changes here from the 2014 Artificer to the 2024 Artificer. It's still got spellcasting. I didn't realize the Artificer was a half caster, like a Paladin or Ranger. I don't think that's a change, but that caught me by surprise when I looked at the spell list.
It is not a change. It's been that way.
Magical Tinkering it's a first level ability. It allows them to just basically make a non-magical object. There's a list of equipment. It's like a bedroll, a piece of rope, etc., a candlestick, a soap, I'm sure, a rubber ducky. Then I believe it's level 2. They get replicate magic item, and this replaces the infusions ability. So instead of infusing an object with an extra magical ability, instead you can instantly craft at the end of a long rest 1 or 2 different magic items. You can't craft 2 of the same thing. And so some things that had previously been infusions that weren't magic items have been changed to specific magic items that have been put at the end of the Unearthed Arcana document, like Repeating Shot. It's just called Repeating Shot, which kind of weirds me out a little bit, but it's now a noun, not an adjective. Anyway, there's more flexibility.
Shot repeats. I see.
Yes, exactly. There's more flexibility in the Artificer. For example, the Artillerist's cannon, which I played with an Artillerist in one of my campaigns for quite a while. Instead of needing to choose what type of cannon you're deploying when you deploy it, it can just use all 3 abilities whenever it wants to on rotation, spending the bonus action. You can absorb items that you've created to regain a spell slot, or you can do other things with your magic items to kind of give yourself that sort of flexibility. There's a greater limitation on the number of magic items known that you can craft compared to the infusions you had. I don't know what the exact number is, but let's just say at like 10th level, you might have known 10, 12 infusions. You only know 8 magic items that you could craft at the end of a long rest. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you've stumbled into my personal beef with the 5e Artificer right here. And it's that it's a really fundamental flaw that makes me uncertain about how successful it will ever be in 5th edition. But it's, the Artificer in its present form was made for Eberron in 3rd edition.
Yeah.
3rd edition Eberron. 3rd edition is a version of the game that had magic item crafting rules, very granular magic item crafting rules, as a very core part of the way the game was played. And Eberron, along with many other sort of interesting peculiarities of 3rd edition, it was a 3rd edition setting, right? It took a lot of game mechanics as sort of world building gospel and was like, okay, well, what if a world was this way? What if a world was like the 3rd edition rules implied it to be? And that's kind of what made Eberron so cool. Part of that Artificer was they were really good at making permanent magic items, any magic item, as long as they had the gold and the XP to spend, because that was a 3rd edition thing. As long as they had the resources, they were really, really good at doing that thing and spreading the love. And that's just not the way 5th edition works. It doesn't have a core magic item crafting feature, and its core feature is very well. I mean,
Jeremy Crawford would like to disagree with that. There is magic item crafting in 2024. Technically speaking,
that's fair. And I haven't taken a close enough look at that system well enough to say if it's
it still takes
robust
weeks
enough
to make anything.
Right.
Yeah.
But regardless of whether or not there's a core feature, the Artificer as a 5e class doesn't engage with it. It doesn't really lean into the same niche that the 3rd edition was so successful. The 3rd edition Artificer was so successful in capturing. There's just a tonal disconnect, I think, between I'm going to make magic items and hand them out versus I'm going to infuse an item with magic, possibly temporarily from a limited list. It doesn't feel right.
I feel like we've got similar gripes, which the 5e Artificer was always kind of criticized for not really feeling like a tinkerer. And it feels like this version of it should be called like the Conjurer or something, because it crafts magic items at the end of a long rest like a balloon animal maker. It just kind of like pops them out of nowhere. And it's just like, now there's this.
Now that is a character I would play.
If you make one too many, the previous one pops, like it just disappears.
The Artificer.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. So it's not
Starting
really
a campaign. I already have my character ready.
Sold.
It's not really fulfilling that core fantasy of being a tinkerer or a crafter, because that's difficult to fulfill in 5th edition, right?
Plus the language that Ben and I have complained about before, where it's always like, and then you do stuff, and after an hour, a magical item magically appears. It's like, no, I'm making it like Iron Man in the cave. Mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead, Shawn.
The whole issue was when 5th edition came out, we were told by the designers, magic items are not necessary.
Yes.
Magic items are an extra thing. So now when you try to create something that relies on magic items, you're adding a system that wasn't really meant to be integral to the game into the system. And that's why you get people making string with their tinkerer's tools, but then the string disappears after an hour. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting, because I remember famously, Shawn, a few episodes ago, you railing against magic items. So how do you create a class that uses them?
Yeah, Shawn, solve it right here, right now.
Well, what you do is you create infusions that you can add to magic items rather than... the only thing I was hoping they get rid of is that artillerist cannon that can give temporary hit points to everyone over and over and over again. And then what they did was say, now you can make that cannon, and then you can change it out for something else and then go back to it when you need more temporary hit points for everyone.
Chuckles the Artificer, his cannon is one of those little air cannons.
It also
t-shirt
blows
cannon.
bubbles.
Yes.
It's a flower that squirts water.
Yeah, it's a tough design ask. I feel bad for the person who had to originally design this class for 5th edition when 5th edition really wouldn't support it well, and then be told to redesign it. It's not a easy lift.
I mean, we know that from firsthand experience, right? There's been several different attempts to create some sort of tinkerer, and we have two, arguably, in the Monster Hunter subclasses, being the Trapper, who creates tools that they deploy against monsters. One of my big bugbears as we're writing that and then refining it is, how do you make that fun but not feel magical, not feel, as Dael had said, like the things just appearing at the end of your long rest out of thin air? And how do you make it not feel magical by it arbitrarily disappearing if you craft one too many things? And I think currently where we are, we're still working on it, so it's a bit up in the air. The Trapper Monster Hunter can, in theory, craft limitless items. And the kind of hope, and maybe this is false hope to have hope in players whatsoever, but the kind of thought is that as you're playing, you're consuming them as quick as you're crafting them anyway, and that the cost of crafting them creates a natural sort of conveyor belt of new item to spent item to new item to spent item. There's obviously ways to hack that system if we're going to downtime for 3 weeks and all I'm going to do is sit here and craft these items. But that's probably true of the new Artificer as well. Yes, Dael, go.
I just want to ask, how big is this bugbear? Would you consider it size large? And does that change if it's a player character?
It's a powerful build problem.
Yeah.
Making things feel grounded or mundane in 5e is difficult, because magic is used to just explain the contrivances of a rule set, The other question I wanted to ask is, do we suspect, because Unearthed Arcana, before the big long stretch where we were looking at D&D 2024 as what releases in Unearthed Arcana, was used to playtest material that was ultimately going to end up in a product, right? There were stuff, playtesting giant-themed stuff before Bigby's Adventure with Giants, and playtesting magic stuff before the Magic School book. I can't remember what they're called. But anyway, do we think this could be possibly for a product like an Eberron-style book that might be coming for D&D 2024? Or do we think this is just speculation. We don't know anything, I assume. But or do we think this is just to update the Artificer so it's there?
Yeah, I think there are enough people who just kind of count the Artificer as the 13th assumed class that they wanted to get it updated fairly quickly, even if it wasn't going to be part of the core rules still.
Well, I have a question then, if that's the case.
I've activated his trap card.
Why not just throw it on D&D Beyond? Why is it an Unearthed Arcana PDF and not an
D&D
Beyond?
Because when I went looking for it, I went to D&D Beyond. It was just like, where is it?
Yeah. Huh.
I don't know.
That kind of threw a wrench in my line of thinking.
They've already got a process that they put in place, which is when it's a play test, it's a PDF and it's a different thing. And when it goes up on D&D Beyond, it's official and you can start integrating it. And if people see problems with it on D&D Beyond, you're going to get more of a blowback than if it's put out as a play test. I think that's probably the easiest.
Shawn knew the answer. Yay.
Well, I don't know the answer. I'm guessing.
I accept. No, that's the truth. That's the 100% official answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
If anyone finds problems with it, take it up with Shawn.
Yeah.
And that's why we're the #1 podcast in all the realms, folks.
And the most accurate. Definitely. Speaking of playtest, Pathfinder 2E have also announced a little while ago the Impossible Playtest. I'm not quite sure why it's impossible, but they're playtesting 2 new classes for Pathfinder 2E. The Necromancer, which is being split out as its own class, no longer a subsidiary of the Wizard, which I believe it was in Pathfinder 1E, like it was in D&D. And the Runesmith, that I'm just going to call the Logan from now on.
Right.
The Necromancer, honestly, as I was kind of delving into this, I'm not deeply familiar with the rules of Pathfinder 2E, so I don't really understand mechanically how this will happen, but the core fantasy that they were describing sounded kind of cool, which is using the Necromancer as a sort of crowd control class and using your undead thralls as consumables. So you send them out and they explode, or you use them to restrain, or you use them to do something other than just be like two bodies that follow you around.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of hyped about the idea of let's just make the necromancer its whole own class, because it is such a strong archetype. And even though we think of it as a spellcaster, it's really held back in a lot of ways because of this thing where it's like, right, but it's a wizard, and so they have access to all this stuff, so we can't make them too strong. But the idea of just going all in on the flavor and just being like, yeah, give them a ton of stuff to do with corpses. Great. Love that. I think that sounds really cool and fun, because I think you can start to tap in a lot more to a flavor set that's really prevalent within the minds of fantasy players. Like, I've been thinking about the age, like literally years ago, I did a March Madness where everyone on Twitter voted for what are the 4 like most iconic D&D monsters, and I did a video on how I would approach those 4 monsters in my own game. The only video I never made was the necromancer, because every time I stop to think about it, I'm just like, it's just a wizard. It's just a wizard. Like, there's nothing I could really do to make that more interesting than just being a wizard that is a fun character. But if you approach it as its own thing, I think you can start to get really interesting with it.
Yeah, I agree. You've got me now thinking, like, and I'm translating it into 5e, not to make Pathfinder fans mad, but just because that's the language I know. But I'm like, oh yeah, if it's its own class, then the subclasses are like the spiritualist who, like, you know, doesn't raise zombies or skeletons necessarily, but he's more in the esoteric kind of spiritual
Perhaps
magic.
a healer, because necromancy is for good guys.
You're gonna dig that one up. You're gonna unearth that, so to speak.
Unearth that arcana. You're we doing
reviving
this?
An old, reanimating an old argument there, Dael. Reanimating an old argument,
which is evil.
Exactly. The record will show the truth. And the runesmith, which is being described as a support marshal, who inscribes armor and weapons, and I assume items as well, with runes that provide buffs to themselves, or they can give it to allies, which I think is cool, but also has the ability to be a little bit more flexible to invoke runes for more instantaneous effects as well. I believe during battle, they might be able to like quickly inscribe a rune on an opponent and then can call out that rune to cause it to explode or do some other effect. So it sounds like a cool kind of the Gish, the spell sword. That kind of fantasy is difficult to do, as we've seen before, at least in 5th edition, with the Eldritch Knight not really scratching people's backs and the Paladin feeling maybe a little too specific as a divine caster. This sounds really cool. So
I also, even though I don't know that it makes sense, calling it the Impossible Playtest is like just a fun branding decision. It's just ripping off the Impossible Burger. Here for it. Are you a vegetarian who plays TTRPGs? Have we got the playtest for you? No animals harmed in this playtest.
I believe the playtest is going till the end of January. It started sometime, I think, in mid-December. So if you are a Pathfinder player or getting into Pathfinder, go check it out. And now we're entering what I'm calling the D&D licensing corner. Let me see if I can sell some stuff here. Let me rub my hands together. Shawn Merwin, can I interest you in a D&D themed pinball machine, complete with animatronic dragons?
Hell yes.
Yes, absolutely. Give me a good pinball game.
Hell yes.
Any day of the week.
This is the first time you've brought us a product in this segment that I actually want.
Yeah, no notes. I'd have it in my house.
For $7,000, you can have that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, okay. Can I finance it?
Yes.
Potentially.
Let me see.
Yes, Stern Pinball is the company, has announced a D&D themed machine called the Tyrant's Eye. Don't know much about it yet, except that it's going to have a dragon animatronic in it by the looks of it, which you get a glimpse of in their little cinematic trailer. Looks cool. More news coming soon. If the pinball machine didn't take your fancy, what about an experience? Can I interest you in an experience? Universal Fan Fest, which is an event that I believe is held at Universal Studios in Hollywood, are searching for the voice of Xanathar, the famous beholder from D&D cities.
There's sort of a beholder theme going on here.
It's Waterdeep.
I have such beef with Waterdeep at the moment. Sorry, sidebar. I went to see 20-Sided Tavern. It was a really fun show. I had a great time. Well done to the performers. But why is the show obsessed with telling me about the wards of Waterdeep? I don't want to know.
What can you tell us about the Lords of Waterdeep? What did you learn?
Not even the Lords. Not the Lords, Ben. That would be more exciting. The wards. The
neighborhoods?
The places. The neighborhoods of Waterdeep. Why are we here?
Just to suffer.
Well, if you want to explore the wards of Waterdeep for yourself in person, you might attend Universal Fan
Oh,
Fest.
damn it. It's brand synergy.
So Universal Studios Hollywood have put out a casting call for Xanathar, which describes an actor who must also be able to operate a push-pull articulated creature, pushing and pulling up to 30 pounds of suspended weight for 45 minutes at a time during a performance, which suggests that this
Puppeteering.
Xanathar is going to be some big puppeteered, maybe semi-animatronic, like beholdery thing that's going to float out, and well, maybe not float, but kind of get carted out on a crane or something.
I go to LA for that. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Would you be interested in playing Xanathar, James?
Yes, bring me all your gold pieces.
I suddenly like Xanathar more than I did before. That's how Xanathar should sound.
I'll see if I can bust that out. I've never tried that voice before. That's just
I
sort of
love
burbled
that.
up from within me.
No, great. The guttural Xanathar.
Burbled is the word.
Now I'm just imagining a Xanathar that sounds like Christopher Walken for some reason.
Hey, where's my goldfish?
Perfect.
Chat seems active. Consider clipping this moment for Ghostfire_official.
Did they have a really insightful moment of D&D discussion? No.
No, we were just
Just a silly
burbling.
place.
Well, if an experience doesn't excite you, what about some premium vegan shoes from Koi Footwear? KOI
Impossible shoes.
Footwear. These are impossibly tall shoes. They've released a line of themed boots, flats, trainers. They look cool. Scarlet Moth said that they looked cool in the chat just before. Says that they're great. So there you go. There's a recommendation from an
Oh,
audience
yeah,
member.
she showed them to me a week or two ago.
Oh,
I
hello.
assume-
Okay.
I assume you can't eat them when you're done wearing them.
Mm.
Well, they're faux leather. They're not real leather. So
Oh,
I have
that
to assume at
gelatinous cube
least.
bag is really cute.
I know, isn't that cool?
This week on D&D shopping.
Yeah, the gift guides
It's
are coming in a
working.
little too late.
Yeah, for real.
Well, if the vegan shoes and bags are a little too, let's say, ethical for you, I have another product you might enjoy, which is soon to come, which is digital slot machines that are D&D themed. Games Global is the company, will produce various internet gambling products with the D&D theme, starting with Dungeons & Dragons, Tales of Riches. Seems like an ironic name to me, really. Developed by Neon Valley Studios, to be released in Q1 2025. Dael, I can see you're excited for this one.
Our facial expressions went the other direction. I don't know. I just personally, I'm a little bit of a blow up the pokies type. So not like hyped for that.
Man, you really know how to bring the mood down.
No, I agree. As someone who has worked in 24-hour poker machine venues and been serving chai lattes and beer to people at like 4 a.m., 3 a.m. while they sit there and just mindlessly put coins into slot machines. Sorry, Dante.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also hate like sports bet ads also drive me
Yes.
nuts, but
I have an
Yes.
interesting
just so
anecdote.
slimy.
It's not that interesting now that I think about it. It's more sad.
Okay, never mind then.
But I was
no, just-
well, I was away for the month of November. While I was on the truck, I stopped at a lot of truck stops, right? And every truck stop in America, 90% of them have a little mini casino in them, a little gambling room.
Really?
That
That's
has, 2 or 3 or 4 slot machines. I was washing my clothes and I was hanging around waiting for it to finish. And I was writing notes for the RPG I was researching while I was out on the road and looking at the slot machines. And it truly was like the most soulless looking people I've ever seen. Like they had been drained of vitality, just sort of hypnotized by the machine. This is the sort of thing I imagine my parents saw when I was getting into video games for the first time. It's like what they were fearing, right? It's not what's actually going on, but like actually being captured mind and soul by the machines. Oh my God. It's a legitimately horrifying experience. I've never watched slot machine players before, but it hurt. It hurt to watch.
Yeah, and like I'm not a gambler in any way, but appreciate like playing poker or blackjack or something like that. Like that's a game, right? I can get into that kind of mindset and
Well, I mean, I think there's
put down $20 at a poker table, instantly lost it. It was great. It was a great night out.
There is space for games of chance where adults can choose to bet money on, and even though gambling addictions would still exist in those circumstances, it's just that we're talking specifically about pokies. By the way, slot machines, for all the non-Australians in chat, we call them pokies. There you go. But they are specifically and deliberately predatory and underregulated, and I don't like them.
Right, a slot machine's not even a game. It's just a Skinner box.
Speaking of the darkest timeline, that was our licensing corner. So if your slot machines don't do it for you, maybe less of those, more of the vegan leather. I don't know.
No vegan leather either. Let it be said that I am against vegan leather. It's just petroleum. Real leather is
it's not
sustainable.
great for the environment, actually.
Okay, all right. Maybe less of the vegan leather too.
What about vegan slot machines?
Now we're talking cruelty-free.
Cruelty-free slot machines. Is that just a broken slot machine? There's a bit of sad news from Wyrmwood Studio. Have laid off almost 50% of their work staff during mid-December, which is unfortunate for those folks in particular. The reasons the company were, let's say, pretty public about it, was that they simply didn't have the work coming in as much anymore. They were working through a big backlog from kind of the COVID high years that they've managed to get through. And so financially, it just didn't make sense for the company to hold on to as many employees as they had. So wishing folks there a safe landing, a gainful employment soon, whatever the appropriate expression would be. They put a lot of this on their YouTube channel, which, I don't want to get too deep into that. I just don't really find merit in it. But
it was pretty brutal. They turned it into a reality show, which is bad enough as it is.
D&D, we've done it. We've done it, everyone. We've finally broken mainstream. So for folks that don't know, the New York Times is doing articles about Dungeons and Dragons. And shortly after the New York Times, the Guardian, I believe, got involved. Fox News got involved. The Daily Telegraph, that's an article, that got involved. And then last night, as I finished work and got in my car, my wife said, my dad just called me and asked about a D&D article that's published in The Age, which is like an Australian mainstream newspaper down here in Melbourne. I was like, oh, goodness, it's spreading far and wide. This New York Times article, it's a long article, but it's as deep as a puddle of water. Kind of 2 years too late, skims off the top of the issue about whether race being changed in its terminology to species in the D&D 5e rules is an appropriate change. The vast body of the article says some people are not so happy about it. Some people are cool with it.
Fresh off the presses. Who?
Right?
D&D isn't just mainstream. D&D Scuttlebutt is mainstream now.
Well, then
D&D
the article
isn't mainstream, just Scuttlebutt in general.
yeah, exactly. It kind of takes a slight right turn into then talking about the preface to the D&D history book from last year, and about how the preface kind of
that's what
acknowledged that there were some
that's
problematic. No, that just kind of got thrown in there. Good old Elon gets his name mentioned in the article for the SEO. And then just to finish it off, just to make sure we skirt across all controversies, they finished the article by talking about safety tools. It was great. It was an awesome, as you can imagine, nuanced, detailed, contextualized article that then other publications took their cues from. What did we all think? Did any of us get a chance to read it?
Yeah, I read the article. I mostly agree with you, Ben. Yeah, one periodical I do read fairly regularly is The Atlantic, because it does kind of the opposite of that. It's really good at taking deep dives, often into niche issues I'd never even considered before, which is kind of bad for SEO, I feel. But if you're really into reading deep analysis on a topic that may surprisingly interest you, that's the way to go. I mean, yeah, it's like, I don't know. I got to the article and was like, why did I read this? This didn't improve my life in any way. It didn't improve my life, didn't improve my understanding. It's like,
The Times special edition had a photo of Ginny D. I love that for her.
that's so bizarre.
I'm not sure I do.
I mean, I don't, because that sucks in so many ways, but also it's like, imagine being the face that they choose. It's like, you did it. You did it.
You're the face of D&D.
You're the face of D&D in the mainstream now.
Given the context of the article and the kind of culture war-y nature of it.
I should clarify, I really hope there's no blowback for GDD because of them using a photo. Genuinely. I mean it as like, that's awesome that you are like the recognizable face of D&D, but it sucks if there's any blowback, and I really hope there isn't.
Did you take a look, Shawn? Did you read any of the...
Did I need to? I need to look at the list of Fox News, Telegraph, and need to know what they were going to say? It's just, let's find one more prong of the culture war to poke people with. And try to bring our outrage about different cultures and different folks and different viewpoints into focus and set up the straw man so that we can all punch one straw man, and then the other side will set up a straw man that we can all punch for a while no real learning or empathy or anything remotely like understanding gets done.
Because I read a couple of the articles of the different ones. I was like, what is going to be the different takes on these? And it made me mad because I don't think that it's harmless. Like I don't think it's just like, oh, they kind of didn't have the right context because they're not in the culture, they're not in the fan base or the fandom. And a lot of it, as I've kind of said, were the points that we've talked about in different episodes of this podcast for the last couple of weeks, the X card and safety tools. The race versus species discussion was one we had literally years ago. Preface to the history book we talked about previously. And they're just kind of bouncing off these topics. The New York Times article continued a fallacy, a fundamental misunderstanding about safety tools, which was something along the lines of, I tried to get the quote back up in front of me. It said something to the effect of like, if this safety tool is deployed, the game must change regardless of the game master's desires or something like that. Like the safety tool was some sort of mechanic that like automatically changes the game. The other thing that upset me, but it's kind of funny, is how extremely clearly, and I feel confident saying this, the Daily Telegraph's article was AI written. Because it's just so factually incorrect. Not in like their opinions are incorrect. It's just mixing D&D words around. So for example, it talks about how in the previous edition, the Hill Dwarf would get a +2 to Constitution, as if the Hill Dwarf was the species. In the new edition, the Hill Dwarf now must choose between the background of the miner, which gives it its +2 Constitution, or the scholar, which gives it its +2 Intelligence. Right? So it's mistaking subspecies for background, which the dwarf doesn't have in the new edition.
Why are they even explaining any of this?
Because they put into ChatGPT probably, read New York Times article, write me article with similar opinion or something like that, right? Because the next paragraph was even worse. They said the other classes have changed or something to this effect. They identified the orc and the Vistani as classes when they mean species, and the Vistani, who are a group of people in Curse of Strahd who have been, kind of taken cultural clues insensitively from Romani cultures, which the article does connect Vistani to Roma people, but it identifies them as a class alongside the orc. Like it's just mixing D&D. And if you don't know, if you're not in the culture, if you're in the quote unquote mainstream and you're just reading this article, you're just not getting any. It's not that the article's not detailed. It's just wrong. It's just not present. It's just nonsense. It's trash.
What's that thing called where it's the story about the guy who was like a chemist or whatever, and he's reading the newspaper and he goes through and he's like, oh, this is very informative, very informative. And then he gets to an article that's about like chemistry and his specific specialty in chemistry. And he goes, everything about this is wrong. This is completely wrong. They have no idea what they're talking about. And then he turns the page and he goes, this is very informative. Because it's like, you only know it's wrong because it's your area. And so we have this whole thing.
Yeah, it's kind of, I don't want to generalize too much. And I think, James, what you said before in terms of shouting out good publications is useful because it just kind of shattered, to your point, Dael, my faith in any sort of mainstream media writing. Because you don't know. Unless you know, you don't know that the information being presented to you is any way authentic.
And as much as we can talk about, legacy media is dead, this is why I keep saying legacy media isn't dead. So many people read this. So many people, this is their point of reference. And like you said earlier, Ben, it's not harmless. It's not. We don't need a satanic panic 2.0. We don't need it.
I want to kind of pop back over to the whole culture war angle here. There's a branch of right-wing grifting D&D culture war stuff that was born out of the 2024 PHB, or maybe Dungeon Master's Guide, one of the new 2024 books that references safety tools and
the DMG.
And it raises sort of the X card by a different name. It suggests if you want to end a scene because a line has been crossed or you've become uncomfortable, you can raise your hands above your head in an X, right? That's what the DMG suggests. And that, first of all, is a patently ridiculous gesture. And it is easily parodyable by people who think it's stupid. The X card itself is not stupid. And in fact, was created by a man who I worked with on Tal'Dorei Reborn, not for that book, but by a guy named John Stavropoulos, who is a very good safety tool designer and game designer in general. And the X card is a great tool. And he consulted on the 2024 DMG. And he has said that the X card itself is copyrighted to him. And Wizards did not want to use it directly for legal reasons. A little bit of business scuttlebutt has led to this entire strain of culture war discourse, just because Wizards did not want to get their hands dirty in licensing the actual X card for their game. Now, of course, these people would have ripped safety tools a new one for no reason at all. But the X above the heads was a particularly easy target, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's like learning that the Happy Birthday song is copyrighted, right? Like, right. I would never have realized that the X card itself is a copyrighted.
On the mess that is the Happy Birthday copyright situation.
But you know what I mean? Like there's so many.
I should say it's not even copyrighted. If you Google X card right now, you'll find a Google Doc. It's published under Creative Commons license. They could have used it. They just they would have needed to attribute
attribution.
Him.
Yeah.
They would have needed to attribute.
YouTube is so filled with good advice for game masters from various different channels and blogs as well, and all these sources of information, forums where players and GMs go to get advice and get little tips like safety tools, or like Dael's video that just jumps into my head about traps from years ago about the click sound and you kind of drop to the ground. There's a million, or have the option to.
We're talking about attribution. That was the angry GM, and people often attribute it to me. Even though in the video I say I got it from the angry GM.
Right, there you go. There's so many of those little tips and tricks kind of floating around that are just in the cultural canon, if you will.
I don't see John Stavropoulos' name in the credit section for the DMG, so he must not have been consulting. He must have had some other relation. I don't know the specifics on that. Sorry. That's a journalistic integrity right there.
Yeah, while we're talking
if we've just talked about it that much, it does make sense.
Real-time fact-checking here, folks.
Yeah.
Of ourselves.
And that's how it's done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's that news. So cool. If your weird uncle or aunt, I suppose, or weird relative starts talking to you about D&D and how it's woke, it's falling into the woke oblivion or something, I think the Daily Telegraph called it. That's why. But with a couple of minutes left in this episode, let us hose ourselves off from that filth and answer some fun questions about tabletop role-playing games, which come in. These are two kind of opposite questions. One came in from Duncan, one came in from Nick. Duncan is asking, what piece of folklore do you think would work really well if added to a tabletop RPG like D&D, but you haven't seen implemented yet? Their example being fae that can be tempted with bread and honey. And then inversely, with the time we've got left to try to wrap these questions together a little bit, Nick is asking, do items, characters, or locations with real-world mythologies or folklore break immersion for you when they appear in game? 5e, some of these are characters in 5e named Asmodeus, Baal, Baphomet, but these have kind of theological origins before the game. Clerics can worship gods like Zeus or Thor, I believe were definitely name-checked in the 2014 Player's Handbook. A knight could wield Excalibur or Mjolnir. And even I added this little example, monsters like the Medusa have very specific associations in mythology. So what would you like to see included? What mythologies do you like to draw upon? And do they break your immersion? Have you had players complain about that? How would you avoid breaking immersion?
Look, the immersion breaking for me, I guess it's a case-by-case basis. It still can. But as a mythology nerd, when I first got into TTRPGs, I had to lay the groundwork to just stop thinking about what is like the mythological origin of like particularly with monsters, right? It's like you just got to give up. You just gotta just let it be its own thing. It's a separate thing. I mean, if we talk about I don't know, like gnomes and what are the little dragon guys called? The little kobolds. No, gnomes and kobolds are more or less the same thing if we're speaking like from a mythological folkloric basis, and they become very, very different things in the game. You just kind of have to accept it. But every now and then, like if someone did have Excalibur, I probably would be like, what? So I don't know. Sorry, yes?
I was just going to say, is that the Excalibur or a Excalibur?
Yeah, Excalibur, Caliburn, where are we? What's going on with this? How many Medusas are there? Because I'm trying to think of what's cool because for me, with my vegan evocative, folkloric stuff that I love to put into a game and see in a game, largely I don't think works very well with the rules. The best implementation that I can think of is I love the power of the name. So I've run things where it's like you're facing like an archfey and I know what their real name is. And if you happen to find out what their real name is, even if it's out of the game and you use it, then you can like use that to overpower this archfey because I think that's fun and cool. And the closest I've seen to that happening in like actual published mechanics is in MCDM. I don't think it was even Flea Mortals. I think it was before that. I think it was in like Strongholds and Followers. The demons have similar sort of power of the name mechanics like that. So I love those sorts of things. I would love to see more of the classic like vampiric cart cross running water, salt with ghosts. I don't know, a lot of those kind of things with undead. I would love to see those happen. And I do use them, but I'm not sure how it would work in a published like 5e rule set.
There's a problem in D&D and in all role-playing games about in-character knowledge, out-of-character knowledge, and the transferal of that, which you, depending on the kind of game you run, you may want to lean into that. You know things about werewolves in our culture, and you can use that in the game. Or you might run a game where you want to break those tropes. And that transfer of knowledge between the player, the character, the world, the game master, and the player are all problematic areas. I've found that the strongest way to use cultural folklore, those sorts of things, is to strip them down of their relevance in our world and make them relevant in the world that you are creating with your players. So you can sever that tie between them with all the knowledge and with all the cultural baggage that comes with it. So you can do cool things, but don't name those cool things. Show those cool things, don't tell. And then you are capturing the mythology. You're capturing the Jungian, collective unconscious, right? You're tapping into that without getting so specific that you're doing what Nick asks and breaking the wall there between the reality of the world and the reality that we live in.
People also have different thresholds for these things. I often think about how I will watch Star Wars and not blink an eye when Han Solo says, "I'll see you in hell." But there are people for whom that is all-encompassing. That means that hell and potentially a Christian conception of what hell is, given that the word comes from, it doesn't matter. But, it means that all of that must exist within Star Wars and now we have to unpack it. And I get that. But also it's like, yeah, I know the story of Boulder. Doesn't bug me that Baldur's Gate is a city. It's kind of like everyone's going to have a different line.
In The Hobbit. J.R.R. Tolkien ransacked Norse mythology for the names of his dwarves, and notably, Gandalf as well is a Norse dwarf, right? Gand meaning staff and Ulf meaning elf, right? Magic elf. He faced some issues with that when he went on to go from the lighthearted children's book, The Hobbit, to his saga-ly epic, The Lord of the Rings, and in which he invented something like 6 different languages for. He was like, I don't know how to square the circle. And the way he pulled this hat trick was by making The Lord of the Rings an English translation of a different language source.
Including the names.
Including the names of the hobbits. Frodo is not named Frodo. Sam is not named Sam. None of them are named that. Those are English-ish translations of the names he backfilled to justify this sort of usage. And so if we can say that common is not English, then we can say that Elvish is not Elvish. We can say that if we want to reference Fenrir, we can say it's a name that a modern Earthling would not know, referencing some sort of, wolf of death, and Fenrir is the most appropriate translation.
Yeah, this is the equivalent.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's
like calling a metal bowl a gorgon. Or something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's something that really upsets my wife, who's got a PhD in folklore and fairy tales, and whenever she sees a D&D monster that is like just completely not what it's supposed to be, the gorgon and the lamia, really upsets her.
I'm right there with you, Tori. I'm right there with you.
But the words we are speaking right now have a history, right? They came from somewhere. And knowing that, and I think appreciating that all culture is ever evolving and it is ever moving, and there's no base upon which it was built, because that base had a base that goes down and down and down and down and down, and shifts and changes within different regions and things like that. And you can play with those. I didn't know that about Gandalf's name specifically, and I kind of love that, right? Because it has meaning in Norse myth, which Lord of the Rings generally has kind of a Norse-ish kind of vibe to it, makes it feel kind of more meaningful to me, at least. I love that. And also knowing that Gandalf has different names in different regions of Middle-earth, and I'm sure that Tolkien, there were reasons why he invented different names for him, and they have all their own meaning to those in-world peoples. And so you can kind of start to play with that, and take different sounds that are suitable for what it is you want to create to grab a feeling or a vibe. Like I wasn't there when the Valakan clans were named, but I have no doubt that the kind of sound of Valakar is deliberately close to Viking. Yeah. Right?
Yes.
Because that is the feeling that we want to put in people's minds when they think Valakar. So, as is, most things in Burak are intended to have a German sort of feel to them. Most things in Charnot are meant to have a French kind of feel to them, a French romanticism kind of feel. So you can use that real world knowledge to kind of remix it and find ways of not necessarily disguising it deliberately, but just letting it capture the vibe you want it to, with as Shawn said before, the kind of Erd knowledge that we all kind of have, without it feeling like it's crashing through the setting by having Excalibur suddenly rise from a lake in the middle of the land of 1,000 rivers. You know what I mean?
It really goes to show that everyone's sort of boundary is different, right?
Sure.
But Excalibur does seem a bridge too far for most of us. Well,
I took forever. I wanted the sword, and I'm still going to mispronounce it despite the fact that I came up with the name of Demglazvir, which is the sword that was gifted to the Emperor from the god Maligant in our setting. And I was like, this sword needs a name like Excalibur. This sword needs a name that commands respect, it feels ancient, to go seeking it. But I can't call it Excalibur or Caliburn or something like that that's going to make it stick out. It needs to feel native to its own setting, right? And there are so many different permutations of what that Dimglazvir, Dim Glang. You know, there were millions of different permeations of what I tried before I settled on a final name in trying to make it feel authentic to the setting. But because all language has a history.
Because those are fun ones that when they go to a new area, someone can recognize the sword but call it by a slightly different name.
Well, that's what. So the Garm. The Garm is a monster that we invented for an adventure that we were running last year. Now, the Garm is a giant wolf. Its mythology in setting ties into Garmur or Garm, the wolf from Norse mythology, who is sometimes a separate wolf from Fenrir, but has very similar stories to Fenrir. But in Shawn, it's called a Helgrim, kind of remixing the name a little bit and tying it into words like hell and because even within Grimhollow, even within Etheros, these creatures have different names and different cultural contexts and different meanings between the regions. And this is how you make a world when you're world building feel ancient and varied, and like these cultures didn't just spring up and were invented off the top of someone's head, but grew from a seed of culture that continued to flower out and out and out and out and out. And also, anyway,
when I hear this, using myth and legends, all I can think of is Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where they're heading to Camelot and they look up and Camelot, and Terry Gilliam's character Patsy says, "It's only a model," and that's everything we do, right? We can give it the gravitas that we want, but in the end, if we're putting it into our game, it's only a model.
I mean, I think the other end of that, just very quickly, because I know we're over time. I would love to play a game that is just set, whether it's 5e or a different system, just set in Norse myth, because then you have that it's not subtext anymore. It's, it is text that everybody can share the experience of knowing who these deities are, what these things are, so that when they show up in game, it has special meaning.
The Forgotten Realms had an interesting way of handling this, which is that Earth is real, and occasionally it bleeds over into the realms. The gods of, what is it, Halrua? It's one of the places that 5e has not touched on. It's a neighbor of Thay. The gods of Halrua are just straight up the Egyptian gods, and they're just there. And the Forgotten Realmsians, the Faerunians, have a different name for them, but they are just straight up the Egyptian gods, and who knows what else may have been carried from Earth from them.
It's very reminiscent of when the ancient Greeks started interacting with the ancient Egyptians. And they were like, yours kind of look the same as ours. They're probably the same. We're probably just calling them by different names. It's probably the same.
Wasn't that a Roman thing that they had a habit of like integrating other people's mythologies and religions? And even, it's
not just the Romans. It's
yes. Yeah. I mean, I've watched Overly Sarcastic Productions videos, and they talk about how, the god Pan might have come from like this deep ancient place and kind of got tacked onto the mythology, or Dionysus as well. So anyway, that sort of stuff fascinates me. I could go on for hours, but alas, we are actually at -9 minutes of time. So we got to get out of here.
We're excited to be back.
We are. Thank you for joining us. You can join us 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific on a Monday. It is 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Time on a Tuesday. Catch us on YouTube. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Give it one of these ones. That's a thumbs up if you're listening on the podcast app. But if you're listening there, it's probably a star. Just give it more than one though, maybe 5. I don't know. If you enjoy,
you know the platform that you're on. Your favorite platform is the one you use. You know how it works. Please press the buttons that are relevant.
I do also enjoy folks telling us week to week now what they're doing when they're listening to the podcast. People telling me
I love that. How many of them are driving and how many of them are washing the dishes?
Exactly. It's great.
Or both.
We need a graph.
Maybe I'll start a poll on the YouTube channel now. Actually, I can do it on Spotify as well. You can pull over and hit the poll this week. Are you driving or are you doing dishes? Anyway, I've been Ben Byrne here with Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake. We will be back next week, and we will catch you then. Silent Waves this week. Silent Waves.
What happened to us?
We're rusty. We're out of practice.
Sounded rusty.
Whatever.
Oh,
Bada, 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 bada.
Well done, all.